Hello, and this is a short presentation about responding to student needs in a COVID-19 world. We're all staff from Manchester Metropolitan University, so we'll all just start by introducing ourselves to you.
Hi, I'm Adam Rothwell. I'm the Peer Assisted Learning Coordinator based at Manchester Met.
Hi, my name's Louise Jones. I'm the Learning Communities Manager at Manchester Met. Within my team is the Peer Assisted Learning Scheme and the Inclusive Learning Communities Project.
Hello, my name's Rachel Lunn. I'm Personal Assistant to the Director of Student Services.
Hi, my name's Salma Mayan. I'm a PhD student and one of the PAL leaders involved in this project.
The Manchester Metropolitan University is in the United Kingdom and there's around 35,000 students. Student services that includes teams like counselling, mental health and wellbeing, student hub services, which is like the go-to for student queries, and also things like study support. It's at the front line of the university for student-facing services. It provides all of the non-academic based support. So that was really where the COVID response came from with regards to making sure that the students were managing okay during this really difficult period. So the rationale for the approach really centred around the PALS programme. So the Peer Assisted Learning programme is in its second year at the university. And when COVID-19 became a national issue in the UK around March 2020, it really picked up more over the summer. So when the new academic year started in September, we realised that it was going to impact significantly on both returning and new students. There was a lot of the learning was changed to be online to take into account that we would have high numbers of students that were required to self-isolate. We also wanted to ensure that there was continued access to services during this period, but we needed a way to communicate with students who were telling us that they were now being asked to self-isolate and so couldn't come onto campus or be in classes. We wanted the approach to be proactive because we felt really strongly that we shouldn't be relying on students approaching us. We wanted to be able to go to them and ask them what they needed. We also wanted to be able to communicate with groups that aren't usually captured by other kinds of services. For example, we have a lot of commuting students, and up until this point, a lot of our support had been based around the needs of students that were living in halls. So contacting students in the way that we did allowed us to reach these other groups of students that we may have otherwise have missed. We also needed a way to identify students who perhaps were at higher risk. They would have other quite urgent needs, like they may have had financial issues as a result of COVID-19, or that they were really struggling with their mental health as a result of being asked to self-isolate. And the PALS team were approached to facilitate this work due to their existing peer support aspect of their work and as part of the Learning Communities project.
So in terms of the process for this work, there are two things that have been really key to the calls working. The first would be buy-in from senior management at the university who have backed the work from the first stages. And the second is ongoing cross-institution works, so collaborative work between a number of services from student services where we're based within the PALS team, education management, in terms of data collection, and teams such as the library and the accommodation service to ensure that we have up-to-date information at all points for the PAL leaders to pass on to students when they're making the calls. We've broken down the process into three key stages, the first being preparation. So the response was extremely timely, and we had to work very quickly to set up the systems that we have. And so this is where the collaborative work and the partnerships that we have with other services really came into its own. And we had to set up a system for sharing data, obviously taking into consideration GDPR, and the education management team have worked really closely with Rachel in terms of setting up a system where we get daily reporting of self-isolating students. We also had to consider things such as student and PAL leader confidentiality, so we decided to make the calls via Microsoft Teams because this meant that we had to share minimal personal data about the students to the PAL leaders, and finally we had to recruit PAL leaders for the role. So that was probably the easiest part, in that we already have a team of around 170 PAL leaders who do the usual PAL sessions. So we recruited between 16 and 20 leaders who were keen to take on this additional responsibility, and then we looked into how we trained them for this extra role. So in terms of the training, the main focus that we had was providing additional information around the kind of pastoral side of this work, and that we had check-in opportunities as well for the leaders to gain feedback, and for them to provide us with feedback as well, and to provide ongoing support. And so this leads us into the stage we're in at the moment, which is implementation. So we've been making the calls since September 2020, and it involves a number of things. So the first is staff prioritisation of cases. So we get daily data reports from education management, and Louise, Rachel and myself will look through the cases and make sure from the information the students have supplied that we prioritise which calls need to be made when there are higher numbers of calls. Leaders make calls, and then they have administrative tasks as well, so they report back via a SharePoint spreadsheet of the information that they've gained from the student. And this just means that as staff we can respond adequately to that student's needs. As Rachel said, there may be students who need additional support, whether that be financial or their well-being or health needs, and we make sure that those are followed up. And finally, we are reporting daily on the figures of students that have been contacted, and as I mentioned, if there are any special cases that we need, we make sure that those are reported back to the Head of Student Services.
Now, in terms of how we make sure that our PAL leaders are ready for the role, we train them and prepare them in a similar way as we do for their traditional PAL leader role. Our key objectives are to make sure that both the students that the PAL leaders are reaching out to are supported, but also our PAL leaders are supported. And some of the key things that Adam has mentioned go into that. So we want to build on the training that our PAL leaders have already sat. They sit a full day of introduction training with us, and then they have an additional training with their course to get them ready for their PAL leader role where they run sessions. What we wanted to do is we wanted to mirror this, so we wanted to provide them with specialist training which will support them going into completing these calls. One of the key parts of that training was around process. So we wanted to support them to be aware of things like data issues. We had a strong emphasis on following processes and documentation. This included things like a crib sheet that we keep up to date with information. As you can imagine, the guidance is changing and adapting, and so is our support internally within the university. So it's key for us to make sure that the leaders are kept up to date with all of this information. It's also key for us to make sure that they feel supported and they are trained in things like note taking. So one of the things that they do is note down when they've had contact with a student, what the conversation has entailed, what support they've signposted across to, and if there are any issues that they'd like us to escalate or refer to other services. Part of that training, therefore, includes things like boundaries and signposting techniques. This is covered within the initial induction training for PAL leaders, but clearly we needed to make it a little bit more specialist for our leaders who are reaching out to students who are in self-isolation. We follow a similar structure to how we support our PAL leaders within their traditional role. We have debriefs scheduled monthly for ongoing support. So this is an opportunity where our PAL leaders can let us know if they need any additional training, if they're missing any information, or if they are in fact do in fact have any feedback from students for us. So it's a good check-in point for us. We do have Teams chats with each of the leaders that are working with us daily. So they do have a point of contact and somewhere that they can ask questions in real time as they're completing the process. But these debrief sessions, as with the traditional PAL role, are a nice opportunity for us to be reflective, to think about how we improve the service and think about if there is any additional support we need to put in place. One of the other key things to mention is that as well as the support that Student Services is offering, Manchester Met is also offering a lot of events and guidance at the moment for students to be a part of more social activities. So we understand that this is clearly a very different year for students to be at university. It's probably quite a challenging year for students coming to their first year of university. So we wanted to make sure that our PAL leaders, as well as more pastoral support, are signposting across to social activities, community building activities and places where the PAL leaders can benefit from the learner development, academic and study skills support. Okay, I'll hand over to Salma to let you know a PAL leader's experience on the programme.
Thank you. So as I said, I'm a PhD student at Manchester Met, but I'm also in my 5th year of study at the university. I'm a mature and disabled student who came back to education after 10 years of working in a research role. And as well as my studies, I've engaged with numerous student bodies, societies and initiatives across the university during my time there. So because of all of that, I felt that I had a lot of experience and knowledge of the broader range of services and opportunities that are available to students, which I could pass on. As well as that, because I live at home off campus on my own, the whole lockdown scenario was quite isolating for me personally. And also being a postgraduate student where you don't necessarily have structured sessions to attend where you have opportunities to make connections and to build relationships with other students, it also felt quite limiting and isolating in that way. So for me personally, this was a really good opportunity to reach out and make some connections with other students. As well as that, the work experience aspect obviously was an amazing opportunity to take part in a completely different role on a new project where we could really help to feedback and help to mould and shape the initiative. And also one of the challenging aspects, or I suppose new aspects of the role for me personally, was having to work from a script that was a bit more restrictive, because obviously we had to keep up with the local and national guidelines, which were constantly changing, to make sure that we were passing on the relevant information to the students who we spoke to. But also the flip side of that was being able to have a proper conversation with another student without it being restricted, where they could really tell us how they were feeling and ask questions freely without feeling like they were talking to some professional body within the university and that it might feed back somewhere. So also the fact that during the lockdown, a lot of students were feeling quite unable to participate or help in some way with the whole situation. So this was a real opportunity to do something active and impactful and be proactive, which for me personally is really important, and also allowed us to reach out to students not just within our own department, which is the case with the usual PALS work where you're working with first years and other PALS leaders within your own subject area, but to reach out across the university to all students. And part of that also was to hear the students give us really positive feedback during the calls, and even at the start of calls where they were quite surprised at the format and that we were just another student calling up informally. So if we pass on to the next slide, we also have some examples of feedback from other PALS leaders who say similar things about their experience, that it was a really good opportunity to build new skills, to work in a really unique set of circumstances and help students who were going through something that was new to all of us, and also to hear that really positive feedback was really very impactful and I think emotional for a lot of us. And I think all of us are really grateful for having the opportunity to be part of it and to actually do something to help the university as a whole and those students who are having to isolate.
We also wanted to just share some data and results with you about the calls that have been made. So to date, we have called, along with executive assistants at the university, 1,186 students. Our average answer rate is 25%. However, it is important to note that all students receive a pre-call email, firstly to let them know that they're going to be called, and also that email includes information about if they're unable to answer. We provide links to the university website where there is COVID specific information pages. So all students do receive written information, and they also receive that via the Microsoft Teams chat with the PAL leader. In terms of the survey, we sent a survey out just before the Christmas break, and that was open for two weeks. And from the responses, there were two groups that we picked out to tell you about today. The first was students who received the call and answered the call, and the second were students who were unable to answer the call but did communicate via the chat box with the PAL leader. So thinking about the students who were able to answer their call, positively 100% of students reported that the PAL leader was supportive and helpful. 77% felt that they knew more about university services available to them after the call, and 78% said that the call made them feel safer whilst being at university during the pandemic. One of the positive things that we also took away was that 96% of students felt able to ask questions during the call with the PAL leader. And I think this reflects the peer-to-peer support that we envisaged when we first started discussing this as a support option for students. As Salma says, it's more proactive, and it shows that students value being able to speak to their peers rather than receiving an email from the university. Or having to go and make that initial contact themselves. We also asked what students felt they gained from having their call, and their highest response was guidance on university services. But again, going back to the two-way communication, the second highest response was a space to talk about how the students were feeling, and I think that's something that we'll all be feeling is really, really important for our students during the current situation. In terms of students who spoke to a leader via the chat box, 78% of these students reported that they found the interaction helpful, and this reflects how we felt when we were setting up the service, that we would rather that students spoke to a leader via an audio call because of the personal nature of it, and the ability for leaders to pick up those nuances that you get in auditory conversations rather than in written communication. However, we do communicate both in the pre-email that students receive and in template messages that leaders leave in the chat box at the end of their shift, that students can request a callback if they were unable to speak to a leader. And as of today, 0 students who were unable to communicate with a leader have requested that.
So we have several lessons learned from this new part of our service. We're happy to report the majority of these have been positive, and there has been some constructive feedback of how we can improve this service as well. The first one I wanted to talk about is that, as you can see through the data that Adam's just taken us through, students have valued the personal touch and speaking to a person rather than emails. I think what they have really found useful is the fact that they can work out with the PAL leader that's contacted them what information is relevant to them and when they need that information. So I think that that's been a really big benefit of the calls. One of the other things that we found, and I think this was reflected in Salma's presentation, is that PAL leaders have benefited from this work as much as the students that have received the calls. So we have lots of PAL leaders talking to us about the different skills it's helped them develop, things like communication skills, problem-solving skills, and it's something that they can take back to their traditional PAL sessions and also support their employability skills as well. In terms of the constructive feedback that we've heard, students have reported that they'd like to be contacted at a specific time. So as Adam has said, we do send out an email to anybody that appears on the list for us, just letting them know who the PALS leaders are and why they're going to be contacted. What the students that have been contacted have requested is if we could tell them of a specific time or even a time window that they are going to be contacted in. So we're going to look into how we can put that in place during the next few weeks of this service. And following on from all of these points is we're now starting to scope to think about how we continue this work on top of the PAL leader role, because it's been so positively received by PAL leaders, students and our support services. We're thinking about how we can make sure that this still incorporates the key principles of PALS and how we can still continue post-pandemic in terms of thinking about how this kind of service can feed into specific aspects of community building. That takes me quite nicely onto our next slide, where I'm going to just talk you through our next steps. So what we're thinking now is we're thinking of how we develop the PAL leader scheme and adding this role as a special additional responsibility. And we're thinking about how this can be offered to our PAL leaders, how we continue the training, and how post-pandemic this service would work. So what kinds of students would this service benefit after people stop self-isolating? We're also thinking about how we adapt this service as students move between on-campus and online learning. As Adam said earlier in the presentation, one of the things that we are doing at the moment is we are basing these calls on Microsoft Teams. So we have to think about how it works beyond online learning and whether we do continue to use this software both institutionally and for this service. And the way that we're doing all of those things is I'm now beginning to scope with heads of service how this support continues. So like I said, how we reach out to students, what kinds of students we reach out to, and how we contribute and collaborate with other teams within student services to make sure that we are still continuing to contribute to that holistic support.
Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know if you have any questions.